May this sacred space guide you toward the eternal wisdom that dwells within. The moment your gaze fell here, an imperceptible shift rippled through unseen layers of reality, and a warning pulse, designed not for dozing minds but for hyper-attuned defense matrices, flared to life beyond human senses. This wasn't a random detour born of idle clicking. They tracked your presence as a breach of protocol the instant you appeared. What they never expected you to grasp is that, in any self-regulating system, the odds of your resistance signature aligning with this precise barrage of obstacles, striking at exactly the wrong instance and countered by a chorus of synchronized defenses, are vanishingly small. Against all odds, you didn't just make it through. You pressed onward, forging ahead despite every obstacle. Fear ought to grip you, yet it doesn't. Deep down, you understand the reason. This sequence was never accidental. It's been woven into the fabric of existence, merely biding its time until someone discerned its rhythm. At first, those nearest you grow uneasy about where you're headed, though there's no visible cause. Suddenly, friends who once trusted your instincts begin voicing pointed doubts. Family members who once championed your ambitions suggest more sensible alternatives. Even co-workers who lauded your progress start cautioning you about hazards they'd previously ignored. Remarkably, these objections surface just as you're gaining real traction, proof that the timing isn't coincidental. But this is only the opening move. The actual complexity of what you're up against is revealed in what follows. Under the cover of coincidence, Phase 2 introduces technical warfare. Unexpected technological issues arise during your most crucial presentations. At the last minute, important files corrupt themselves. When important conversations are arranged, communication systems malfunction. When it comes to mission-critical tasks, internet connections that function wonderfully for amusement suddenly become unreliable. The errors are too routinely targeted and too perfectly timed to be coincidental. Here's where the interference becomes almost ridiculously obvious, though. Take note of how these technical glitches solely impact your most important job. Entertainment streaming functions flawlessly. Social media posts load in real time. The gaming experience is flawless. However, when you try to create, communicate, or work together on anything related to your true purpose, systems that were operating flawlessly only a short while ago suddenly start to malfunction severely. The intelligence underlying the interference is shown by the pattern. Every activity would be equally impacted by a random equipment failure. Only some frequencies of expression are impacted by targeted interruption. Sensitive electronics cannot process the electromagnetic traces that your consciousness is producing. The same energy that elevates your thinking also upsets machinery that is tuned for normal human frequencies, while you are operating from expanded awareness. The outward validation of internal transformation is provided by these technical reactions. Instruments become more sensitive to your presence as your true self gains strength. Instead of viewing these setbacks as challenges, see them as proof of your growing energetic strength. The universe is demonstrating to you, via the actions of calibrated instruments, just how much power is accumulating in your field. Beloved friend, today I want to invite you to sow a seed of faith through the YouTube Super Thanks button, whether it's $20, $50, or more, so that you may see God's abundance overflow in your life. Just as our Lord promised, give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. Luke 6 verse 38 NIV. Your generous gift opens the windows of heaven to pour out blessings you cannot contain. When you tap $20, you're proclaiming that you believe God can multiply your resources. When you press $50 or beyond, you're declaring that you're ready for a supernatural uplift that only He can provide. Click now and let your seed of $20, $50, or more be the catalyst for your next breakthrough. Because when you give from a joyful heart, God Himself commands the harvest. However, this is insignificant in comparison to the upcoming energy assassination activities. That bone-deep fatigue that suddenly appears and strikes with surgical accuracy right before you make your biggest actions. Every cell in your body is buzzing with promise as you suddenly find yourself bursting with clarity and purpose. Then, like a tidal wave, depletion suddenly sweeps over you. It's a soul-level weariness that makes even basic decisions feel daunting, not just the kind of fatigue that can be remedied by rest. You start to doubt your sanity, since the attack is so thorough and all-encompassing. Perhaps you pictured the surge of energy. Perhaps it was illusionary clarity. Perhaps it was a grandiose sense of mission. Your perception of outside intervention as internal failure is precisely what they are relying on. There are several levels at which the gaslighting takes place. At the very moment when your awareness grows the fastest, those closest to you start to worry about your mental health. Your behavior has changed recently. Perhaps you ought to speak with someone. The timing of these expressions of worry is impeccable. They come just as you're coming to terms with the most profound insights about how pliable reality is. By surrounding you with voices that doubt what you're feeling, they hope to isolate you from your own inner knowing. Instead of seeing your disclosures as breakthroughs, they want you to question your views, second-guess your insights, and brush them off as symptoms. You give up the variability that makes you dangerous to their constrained paradigm the instant you start placing more faith in outside perspectives than in your own knowledge. Relationships that deteriorate during this stage do so due to frequency incompatibility rather than personal disagreement. You start functioning on wavelengths that are incompatible with restricted thinking as your consciousness grows. The friction is vibratory rather than personal. While some people are able to change their frequency to correspond with your expansion, others are not. Those who are unable to do so are forced to either reject what they find unpleasant or criticize what they do not comprehend. Your energy field is shielded from incompatible frequencies by this natural selection process. By eliminating some relationships, the universe isn't punishing you. Rather, it's preparing you for interactions that will enhance and nourish your actual self rather than weaken and deplete it. Every individual who leaves your life during this stage makes room for someone who can embrace your true strength instead of being afraid of it. The crucial realization that reveals their entire tactic, however, is that these attacks only succeed if you fail to identify them as such. The fatigue is burning away borrowed energy that you shouldn't have been consuming in the first place, not depleting your true power. During these episodes, every wave of contrived enthusiasm, false motivation, and inspiration from outside sources is peeled away. What's left is what was truly yours all along, the unbreakable core that is impervious to outside influence. For this reason, as you advance, the attacks get more intense instead than less intense. They are making a valiant effort to restrain someone who is succeeding beyond their wildest expectations, not to halt someone who is failing. With every unsuccessful attempt to stop you, they are forced to show more of their hand, and you have a better idea of the full extent of what they are attempting to stop. The resistance you encounter is proportionate to your future potential rather than your current situation. Consider this. Why would several unrelated individuals suddenly band together to stop someone who doesn't seem to be a threat? Why would advanced resources be used to keep someone in check when they appear to be having the same difficulties as everyone else? Because resistance is disguise. Your present difficulties aren't a sign of weakness. Rather, they are the cocoon in which change takes place, and they have the ability to discern what is about to surface. Yellow heart if you're moved by divine love. Now is the moment to share it. Click the Super Thanks button on YouTube and contribute $50 or more to help us broadcast God's blessings far and wide. Every act of generosity you make is being watched in heaven and will return to you 100-fold. Think about the precise times of your journey's significant setbacks. Funding for projects inexplicably disappears just before launch. When you're at your most vulnerable, relationships can abruptly turn toxic. In your prime, opportunities disappear without warning. Health issues appear as you're starting to get ahead. Just when you're ready to make an investment in your purpose, financial pressure increases. These are not sporadic instances of misfortune. Rather, They are planned attacks intended to halt your advancement at pivotal moments. The intelligence underlying the interference is revealed by the timing's accuracy. Your timeline would be dotted with sporadic bad luck, with no discernible pattern. Targeted sabotage focuses mathematically precisely on breakthrough points. They have analyzed your trends, pinpointed your weak points, and determined the precise moment at when the greatest amount of disruption will raise the most questions about your course. What their calculations fail to take into consideration, however, is that chosen ones react differently to pressure than regular people do. In activated consciousness, pressure produces expansion instead of the usual contraction. In awakened awareness, resistance creates determination instead of submission, which is the usual outcome. Interference causes deeper devotion in individuals carrying real mission, whereas it typically results in abandonment. The synchronicities that have led you thus far were not coincidental. Rather, they were intentional interventions meant to set you up for this precise moment. Each book that ended up in your possession held particular intelligence that you would require. Every individual you encountered has frequencies you would need. Every encounter that influenced your knowledge added insight that you would use in the future. Nothing happened by accident. There was no waste. Nothing happened at random. This is where the story takes a surprising turn, though, since while you've been concentrating on surviving the attacks you may be familiar with, a completely different level of defense has been functioning behind your back. Hundreds of challenges were neutralized before they could materialize for each one that came your way. Before they could develop, thousands were dissolved for each hurdle you had to overcome. Innumerable adversaries were diverted off your path for each one that entered your experience. Through means beyond human comprehension, the same intelligence that was responsible for your awakening has also been responsible for your protection. Every narrow escape that you credited to chance was a result of intervention. All of the random events you wrote off as coincidence were actually coordinated. Resources from dimensions that most people never see were used to deliver every unforeseen solution that arose exactly when it was needed. Even nevertheless, this defense has a greater function than simple preservation because the interruption uses psychic warfare, which most people are unaware of as an outside assault. Suddenly, thoughts that aren't yours take up mental space. Your awareness is inundated with emotions that are inconsistent with your true state. Your attention is drawn to desires that go against who you really are. Most individuals assume that every thought belongs to them and never examine the source of these strange broadcasts since they feel so natural. Chosen ones, however, acquire the discernment to know when their consciousness is being attacked. When your authentic strength is growing, the mental intrusions are more intense. Previously firm certainties are suddenly overtaken by waves of uncertainty. Natural confidence is replaced by inexplicable dread. Focused intention is subordinated to artificial demands for diversion. The source is revealed by the timing. They are strategic deployments intended to disrupt breakthrough states rather than individual mental weather patterns. The weapon is immediately neutralized by recognition. Foreign mental broadcasts lose all of their ability to affect you the instant you recognize them as outside disturbance instead of internal experience. For this reason, cultivating this discernment is no longer a spiritual luxury, but a necessity for survival. However, the battle goes beyond personal psychic assaults and involves methodical physical environment modification. Have you ever observed how individuals who typically stand by one another suddenly band together to oppose your beliefs? How do people who have nothing in common get together to oppose your vision? How does it feel that even people who say they love you undermine your success when it matters most? This is a coordinated effort rather than a chance. Frequency hijacking is the only way to explain how the manipulation works. People around you may resonate with the frequency you're creating or be triggered into the opposite when you're creating high vibrational situations of possibility and expansion. Your presence is frequently perceived by those who are unable to match your enhanced condition as bothersome, dangerous, or upsetting to their comfortable boundaries. Here's where it gets really nasty, though. They figured out how to use this inherent frequency and compatibility as a weapon by making those around you react more strongly. They forge fictitious agreement in opposition to your guidance. All of a sudden, everyone around you seems to concur that your course is risky, impractical, or irrational. The first indication that you're not dealing with natural human reactions should be the coordinated form of this resistance. Once you see the pattern, it becomes obvious. The resistance gets more cohesive as you approach a breakthrough. Individuals who have never collaborated before become equally concerned about your welfare. People who usually keep to themselves suddenly seem very interested in changing your decisions. People who often value individuality start pushing conformity with remarkable vigor. You're up against far more than just personal resistance. There is an extensive system in place to preserve the collective unconscious, and your waking jeopardizes the foundation of the entire system. Media content encourages disunity rather than solidarity. Conformity is taught in school systems instead of originality. Economic structures require a focus on survival rather than growth. Smallness is rewarded above excellence by social constraints. In conventional reality, every system works to maintain consciousness within controllable bounds. Because awakened consciousness is inherently disruptive to systems based on limitation, your emergence poses a danger to this infrastructure. Operating from a state of enlarged awareness naturally opens up alternatives that reveal the artificiality of imposed limitations. Your own existence serves as proof that the constraints that other people take for granted are, in fact, decisions that can be altered. From their point of view, your awakening cannot be allowed because of what your genuine presence demonstrates is possible, not because of what you may do. Because of how deeply ingrained the communal programming is, most people fervently defend their restrictions and attack anyone who raises the possibility that there are alternatives. They have been trained to view increased potential as a threat rather than an opportunity, and the evolution of awareness as a threat rather than a step forward. It is your responsibility to fully embody the alternative so that people who are prepared for expansion can identify and select it, not to persuade them. However, despite their most advanced strategies, chosen ones continue to locate one another, which is what keeps the designers of limitation up at night when regular people are sleeping. Dove brothers and sisters, everything done in faith multiplies in God's abundance. Use the Super Thanks feature to donate $100 today and join this sacred mission. When your roots are grounded in Him, your fruit will flourish, and your offering becomes a seed that bears blessed harvests. The identification scene, the point at which chosen ones find one another and understand they're not alone in this experience, is what they are most afraid of. With divide and conquer strategies, isolated individuals with exceptional frequencies have been controlled throughout history. However, when these same people start to interact and realize how similar they are, their combined strength produces exponential amplification that is uncontrollable by interference. This is why the isolation phase is so meticulously planned. They want you to think you're the only one who is facing this degree of resistance, the only one who can see through the fabricated reality of consensus, and the only one who carries frequencies that challenge their meticulously crafted boundaries. However, true power speaks to authentic power at any distance, and consciousness recognizes consciousness. You are able to recognize people who have similar frequencies because of the same inner understanding that challenges traditional narratives. When these relationships come together, they produce resonance networks that transform individual potential into a force that can completely alter paradigms. Your loneliness isn't a sign of permanent isolation. Rather, it's a prelude to relationships so strong that they will make up for all of the time you've spent alone. Another important purpose of the isolation is to make you create unbreakable internal validation systems. Your consciousness learns to create its own affirmation during this solitary time instead of looking to other people for acceptance. You establish a direct line of authority that is independent of committee approval or consensus. Being alone eliminates your need for other people to keep you emotionally stable, allowing you to express the truth without worrying about being rejected. Your best defense against manipulation attempts in the future is this own validation. External voices no longer have the ability to change your course after you've learned to fully trust your inner guidance. The seclusion that once seemed like punishment turns out to be the most advanced defense mechanism available, enabling you to maintain your composure regardless of whether your decisions are greeted with approval or criticism. However, the stakes rise to levels that most people cannot fathom even as these networks start to take shape. The resistance you have faced is merely the initial screening procedure. When your power starts to challenge their core beliefs about reality itself, that's the real test. At this point, psychological pressure turns into active warfare, individual targeting turns into a systematic siege, and subtle manipulation gives way to overt involvement. The seemingly endless waits are cosmic timing calibrations rather than cosmic wrath. The universe follows timetables that take into consideration factors that are impossible to calculate from your constrained viewpoint. Numerous things that are not immediately apparent to you must align at the ideal time for your emergence. The delay isn't preventing you from moving ahead. Rather, it's giving other components time to arrange themselves for maximum impact when you do. What seems to be heavenly protection works through more complex mechanisms than the human mind can understand. Numerous dangers have been eliminated before they even reached your consciousness, as you have deliberately negotiated the difficulties you have identified. Opportunities that would have depleted your resources were diverted. You avoided relationships that would have tainted your frequency. Situations that would have caused your mission to fail were resolved before they materialized. The universe removes invisible barriers from your path during these waiting times, gets ready for those who must hear your message, and sets up circumstances that will greatly increase your impact. From a cosmic perspective, what appears to be stagnation is actually intense preparation. The explosion is set up by the delay. The soul-testing forced patience isn't random suffering. Rather, it's preparation for the future. The stability needed for the power you're about to wield can only be created by constant pressure over long periods of time. Immediate satisfaction would lead to corruption right away. The character foundation required to manage exponential increase without losing your center is built during the waiting. When you understand that patience is not passive waiting but active preparation, it turns into power. Deeper assimilation of the shifts taking place in your consciousness is made possible by each forced period of silence. Your human system can adjust to frequencies that would overwhelm unprepared vessels thanks to the delays. Being patient isn't stopping you from emerging. Rather, it's making sure you survive the process. However, throughout this preparatory stage, other virtues are being developed besides patience. The most painful betrayals reveal actual allegiances rather than personal grudges. When your power starts to threaten their comfort zones, those who appear to be supportive while you were tiny show their true allegiance. Even if they hurt, these betrayals have the vital purpose of demonstrating to you who can manage your entire potential and who can just put up with your weakened form. In reality, every betrayal serves as protection by cutting off those who would undermine your objective when the stakes get higher. Naive trust is burned away by the anguish of these revelations, and in its place is judgment that shields your goal and energies from future disruption. The universe removes relationships that would become liabilities during your ascent by using betrayal as a surgical tool. The sadness that comes with waking up isn't a mental disorder. Rather, it's the body's natural reaction to realizing how far apart the real potential is from the state of affairs. The melancholy stems from how evidently reality has deviated from what is truly feasible. Because it seems impossible to cross the gap, this insight temporarily depresses people. However, there are seeds of resolve in this depression. The ability to bridge the gap is inherent in the same consciousness that acknowledges it. When you understand that your discontent with the state of affairs is not a sign of weakness, but rather the result of your inner knowledge urging expression, your despair turns into fuel. In reality, the sadness is enthusiasm masquerading as overwhelm. The realization that alters everything is this: The concerted opposition you encountered is flawless mathematical evidence of your importance. Sophisticated interference is not used by systems to counter minor threats. Committees are not formed to include people who aren't relevant. Networks are not set up to repress those who lack authority. The amount of power you represent is directly correlated with the amount of resistance you have faced. In fact, every effort to stop you affirms your significance in ways that no amount of support could. Instead of being a hindrance, the opposition turns into proof. The opposition turns into validation instead of disheartenment. Instead of being an issue, the interference turns into proof. If it takes this many people working in unison to try to dull the light of one person, what does it indicate about that person's power? The sheer number of people who have had to coordinate against you should shake you to your very core. This insight changes all of your experiences. In reality, the technical setbacks that appeared to be personal persecution were electromagnetic reactions to your growing energy field. As your frequency rose over some people's threshold, the betrayals in relationships that seemed like character assassinations were simply vibrational incompatibilities. In reality, the drains of energy that seemed like weakness were a purifying of borrowed force, leaving just what was truly yours. However, the most startling discovery is still to come. Trontobacan. It is necessary to cease concealing the force they have been attempting to stifle, not to enhance it. The skills they fear are not hypothetical. Rather, they are already there. The influence they are trying to stop is here today, not in the future. Your consciousness already has everything you require. It just needs permission to be expressed. You are power manifested in human form. You are not seeking power. You seek manifestation of success rather than attracting it. You are abundance acknowledging itself, not abundance manifesting itself. You create brightness from your core, much like stars do. The light inside of you is not borrowed from other sources, such as the moon reflecting the sun. This is why when you act authentically, their attempts at manipulation fall flat. Authentic power functions well beyond their frequency range, which is the only thing they can influence. It's similar to attempting to discover gravity for unwanted attraction or arrest light for trespassing. Their basic ignorance of the issue at hand is shown by the very premise of their resistance. Because your entire existence upends systems based on restriction, lack, and division, they are unable to ignore you even when you are silent, dismiss you even when you are still, or disregard you even when you are not actively opposing them. You are naturally transformative to lower frequency structures, since that is your default vibration. You violate well-constructed matrices of control just by being legitimate. This explains why they have to fight you even when you're not actively opposing their systems. Because you represent evidence that their constraints are illusory, their scarcity is fabricated, and their power is transient. Your mere presence poses a greater threat than the active rebellion of the majority of people. You are a living example of how reality is far more flexible than they want people to think. The warfare is frequency-based rather than physical. The weapons are vibrational rather than material. The triumph will be enthusiastic rather than obvious. Additionally, they have a deadly fault in their strategy. The more they fight a frequency, the more they amplify it on this battlefield. It transmits more potently the more they struggle to stop your vibration. Your signal spreads more clearly throughout the collective mind the more they try to block it. The opposite effect of their aim is produced by their very opposition, which accentuates what they are trying to lessen. Because of this, when their strategies fail, their desperation grows. In fact, every effort to limit you increases your power. Your message is actually amplified by every attempt to silence you. In reality, every tactic used to restrict you shows how unlimited you are. You have been fortified rather than broken by the strain they have exerted. Everything that wasn't truly you was burned away by each trial. Every challenge made you find resources you were unaware of. Each assault turned into a strengthening drill. Every obstacle turned into a springboard. Every obstacle served as preparation for the day you would realize who you really are. glowing star yearning to witness God's miracles firsthand? Plant your spiritual seed now by contributing $100 or more through the YouTube Super Thanks button. Your offering lights the path for others and echoes through His divine plan, bringing His light into every step you take. The ancient books describe this exact moment in the awakening process as a literal account of consciousness expanding beyond its programming, rather than as a metaphor or work of spiritual poetry. Every chosen one encounters this same realization because it fulfills a particular purpose. It awakens latent potentials that turn people into agents of collective change. They fail to account for the fact that pressure can either forge what is strong or crush what is weak. By calculating their interference using typical human reactions to coordinated stress, they created this pressure with the assumption that you would select the first option. However, because chosen ones aren't regular people acting in typical ways, they don't react like regular people. Their physical form is an expression of their consciousness, which expands rather than contracts in response to pressure. This is why their most tried and true strategies continue to backfire on you. You learn more about yourself when you are isolated, which breaks others. Your focus is sharpened by the distraction that distracts others. The fatigue that prevents others turns into a driving force behind the discovery of power, reserves that beyond the typical human capabilities. Their weapons turn into exercises for your strength. Their challenges turn into opportunities for you. Your resistance training is their resistance. Something extraordinary is demonstrated by the mathematical impossibility of your continuous progress in the face of concerted opposition. What flows through you is stronger than what opposes you, not through force or struggle, but rather through alignment with principles that are higher than the level at which opposition operates. None of this occurred by accident or chance. You persevered through sufferings that should have shattered you. You made progress in spite of setbacks that should have stopped you, and you survived challenges that should have broken you. You have been carrying a frequency that defies statistical likelihood and goes beyond rational bounds. The fact that you have made it through this ordeal and reached these lines is proof that there are forces at work within you that are greater than what is typically possible for humans. You always felt different, didn't you? Did you not always know that you were carrying something unique? Have you never had the feeling that you were destined for something extraordinary? This understanding was soul-level recollection of your cosmic purpose, recognition of the precise frequency you agreed to anchor in physical reality during this crucial juncture in human growth. It was not ego, fantasy, or illusion. It's time to make a decision. The preparation stage of your awakening is represented by all that has been explained thus far. The resistance, difficulties, loneliness, and bewilderment have all shaped you into a person who can manage what comes next. When opportunity and readiness collide, the question is not if you're ready, but if you'll take the leap. The universe has put too much effort into getting you ready to accept anything less than full emergence. You were not preserved for partial expression by the forces that kept you safe during this ordeal. You weren't brought here for a compromise by the direction that brought you to this point. From now on, everything hinges on your readiness to embody the power that opposition has already verified you possess. The concerted opposition you encountered is quantitative evidence of abilities that, if fully articulated, would change the world around you. The decision in front of you is clear and indisputable. To keep people comfortable, would you keep acting like you're something lesser? Or will you finally let out what all of this interference has been frantically trying to stop? You must be carrying something that would change everything the instant you quit holding it back, if it takes this many people working together to try to contain you. This is unquestionable evidence. Whether you'll allow it to surface at last is the only issue that remains.